Yes, you are.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight as we remember and celebrate Theodore Bikel, the iconic Jewish artist, activist, idealist, who wanted to be known as the singer of his people. I am Perla Carney, Artistic Director of the Dortort Center for Creativity in the Arts at UCLA Hillel. Before I introduce our host, Amy Ginsberg Bikel, Theodore's widow, I'd like to thank Professor Mark Kligman, who partnered with us on this program and who will be our moderator. Professor Kligman is the Mickey Katz Chair of Jewish Music at the Herb Elbert School of Music at UCLA, as well as the newly appointed director of the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience, the only such center in North America. Our thanks also to Dr. Lori Black, Associate Director of the Lowell Milken Center, and Beth Kramer, the Program Coordinator of the Milken Center. Their work on this program was invaluable. Let me just close this, sorry. Sorry about that. A special shout out to my colleague Giselle Goldwater-Feldman, Director of Community Philanthropy at Hillel at UCLA, who's my great partner for all of our Dortort programs on Zoom. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Amy Ginsberg Bikel, who made this program a reality. Amy and Theo's love story is truly one for the ages. They met at a Shabbat dinner when she was on a visit to Los Angeles from her home in India. Amy had been living in India for 17 years, where she was the India correspondent for Israel's largest newspaper, Yediot Achronot. She was a successful journalist as well as a single mother raising 2 young sons. Amy was leading a busy, productive life. Yet, within 5 months of meeting Theo, she dismantled her life in India, picked up her belongings, and moved to Los Angeles to marry Theo. Although there was a 38-year age difference between them, Amy and Theo were fearless in their love. As Amy so movingly pointed out in her eloquent eulogy at Theo's funeral in 2015, she had decided to choose love over fear and doubt and embark on her journey with Theo. Their union transcended conventional wisdom and added great depth and meaning to their lives. Amy is the co-author with Theo of the recently released award-winning book, Theodore Bikel's The City of Light. The book tells the story of Theo's childhood in Vienna on the eve of the Anschluss and its aftermath. The late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote about, after reading the book, that she hoped that the book will be read by every young person in America. I cannot think of a stronger endorsement. Ladies and gentlemen, Amy Ginsberg Bikel. You're on mute. You have to unmute.
Thank you so much, Perla. And my tears are supposed to come at the end of the program, not at the beginning of the program, but you changed the order of that for me. Perla, thank you so much for having the amazing foresight to have this program. We have 2,600 people signed up for it. I've done many programs about Theo since he passed away, but this is a number that surpasses all. And I think it has to do with your vision and with the careful choosing of the topic of today's program. And that is specifically Theo's legacy of tikkun olam, of activism, of commitment to making this world a better place. So I want to say, first of all, thank you to all of you. Thank you so much to Mark Kligman. Thank you to Perla, to all of the different institutes at UCLA that are hosting this program, and to all of you, all 2,600 of you, for being here today. As most of you know, Theo was magic. He was magical. He was a magical human being. And the many of you who had the great fortune of passing your paths with him felt that when you were near him. He was so talented, but beyond that, he was generous and he was joyful and he was kind. He cared about people. People felt that he cared about them, and that was actually the truth. He loved having a good time. He loved a good party more than anything. But as much as he loved a good party, good cheese, good music, good women, good wine, he loved humanity. And this love caused him sometimes great joy and sometimes great pain. It was more than one time that I found him awake in the middle of the night weeping. And when I, with great concern, would try to find out what it was that he was weeping about, it was about something he just read or thought about usually children's hunger, homeless children, children in war, refugee children. It broke his heart, and he felt that there was no way to live a full life without fighting for making this world a better place. And that is what we're focusing on this program today. We love Fiddler on the Roof. We love The Sound of Music. We love all of his great talents. But today what we're focusing on is his great legacy of social justice. And I have some feeling that maybe that's why so many people signed on, because so many of us all across the United States, our hearts are full at the moment of a commitment to not stop until we see the world that we want to see come into being. And we want to take an example from great people like Theo of how that is actually done. So, and also I just want to welcome our panelists. I'm not going to name them, I'm going to let Mark do that, but let you know that everybody in this program today was a great friend of ours, a great friend of Theo's. Theo loved all of you very, very much. I'll tell you that again once you're on the screen. And I think another reason this program has so many participants and is so special is that it's in Los Angeles, from UCLA. And Theo, after a lifetime of being a refugee and wandering around the world, found LA to be his adopted city that he loved with all of his heart. So before we go on to the rest of our program, we have a very special short film for you that was produced by the Milken Archive of Jewish Music, the American Experience, and its founder, Lowell Milken, in cooperation with the Theodore Bikel Legacy Project. Please hold off on that for a second. We'll talk more after we see the film. This is going to be a short introduction to Theo's life. And before we hit the play, I just want to give a very special thank you to the wonderful filmmakers from the Creative Services Department at the Milken Family Foundation. They were truly wonderful to work with, and I think that you'll like this film that we're about to watch.
When they took me to meet the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he asked me what my Hebrew name was. Then I told him Meir. And he says, you're the one who will bring light to Israel.
ערב של שושנים, נצאנה אל הבוסתן.
Oscar and Tony-nominated actor and folk singer Theodore Bikel was born in Vienna on May 2nd, 1924.
We used to take hikes in the Vienna woods on Sundays, and the woods would echo with the sound of Yiddish songs. It was wonderful. So that's my schooling as far as music is concerned.
On March 12, 1938, 13-year-old Theo and his parents hid behind the curtains of their home and watched in horror as Hitler and his troops annexed Vienna. For the next 6 months, the Bikels struggled to escape Europe.
We were very, very lucky because the British gave out very limited entry permits into Palestine. My father headed the Labor Zionist list, and it saved our lives.
The Bikels were only allowed to take one suitcase each, and the rest of their belongings were confiscated and stored in a warehouse guarded by a Nazi commander.
My grandmother took it into her head to liberate our things. She went there every day. She wanted to talk to him, and he wouldn't see her. But she sat in the anteroom every day from the time they opened until they closed. And he had to pass her on his way in and on his way out. She was crying all the time. And he finally said, after a couple of weeks of that, get that old Jewish woman out of my sight. I'll sign off anything she wants. Just get her out of here. He signed off, and they got our things out of storage, and she had them packed up and shipped from Nazi Austria to Tel Aviv, and they arrived in cartons with swastikas all over them.
Because his socialist father had instilled in him the idea of becoming a pioneer, Bikel joined a kibbutz after graduating agricultural school in Palestine.
It became clear to me that I had absolutely no inclination or talent for agriculture. None. But I could sing songs about the beauty of the work that I wasn't doing.
The kibbutz sent Theo to a seminar in Tel Aviv to learn how to produce holiday pageants.
Once I tasted professionalism that was available in Tel Aviv, I knew that was my life. I went back to the kibbutz. I said, I'm sorry, but I can't stay.
Bikel began his 70-year-long acting career with the Habima Theater, the National Theater of Israel. But when he and a group of young actors realized the older actors had no intention of giving them any real parts, they founded the Kamari Theater in Tel Aviv.
I did 4 plays with the Kamari, and by that time the war was over in Europe.
Bikel moved to London in 1946 to study at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. He made his London stage debut in 1948. Over the next 6 years, Bikel acted in the English theater, including in such hits as Sir Laurence Olivier's Streetcar Named Desire and Peter Ustinov's The Love of 4 Colonels. Bikel left London when he was offered a role in the Broadway show Tonight in Samarkand.
And I came to New York, and I fell in love with New York. I spent 8 years in England. I wasn't an Englishman ever. I spent 8 weeks in New York, and I was a New Yorker.
Bikel was then offered the role of Captain Von Trapp in the original Broadway production of The Sound of Music, alongside Mary Martin. The show was successful beyond anyone's expectations and played to sold-out audiences for more than 2 years. The song Edelweiss, not in the original script, was written especially for Bikel.
Edelweiss, Edelweiss.
While building his theatrical resume, Bikel also launched an illustrious career in music.
In England I sang. It was never a career. But in America, as you well know, they don't tolerate your doing anything well without forcing you to accept money for it.
Among Theo's many recordings, Russian gypsy music was one of his most beloved styles.
I used to go to Paris when I was a student in London. And in Paris were all the expatriate Russians and all the gypsies. And I would sometimes go, and I was a poor student, and I would nurse 1 glass of champagne all night long to listen to the music.
Jack Holtzman of Elektra Records heard Theo singing at a party and asked him to record with his label. Bikel introduced traditional Yiddish songs to wide audiences, giving the language a glamour and a legitimacy it had lost. Throughout his career, Theo recorded 37 contemporary and folk albums in 21 different languages.
I sing in all these other languages that I don't speak, but my sense as an actor is if I don't understand what I'm singing, they won't understand it either. The audience won't. So I made it my business to understand everything that I sing.
Bikel's first film role was playing a German officer in The African Queen in 1951. He soon became known for his mastery in performing characters of different nationalities. In 1958, Bikel was nominated for an Academy Award for his role as a merciful sheriff in The Defiant Ones.
I played Germans, I played Nazis, I played all kinds of, but there was always a purpose to what I did. I believe in some redeeming features of kindness, human kindness, that is necessary. I get that from my background, I get that from my Jewishness, I get that from the ethos that I grew up with. And I've never regretted it.
If I were a rich man, yabba-bee-ba-bee-ba, yabba-ba-ba-bee-ba-bee-ba-bum.
The role for which Bikel was best known was Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. He performed this character more than any other actor to date, more than 2,000 times. Bikel's final project was the documentary Theodore Bikel in the Shoes of Shalom Aleichem. The film is an outgrowth of Bikel's one-man show, Shalom Aleichem, Laughter Through Tears, in which the versatile actor performed more than 20 characters on stage. Theo continued to perform until his last days, determined to bring Yiddish culture to yet another generation of young people.
Young people felt the hankering of a world that was slipping away from them. Their grandparents had it, but the fathers and mothers tried to get away from these funny-looking people, dressed funny, talked funny. Let's be very American. So it became very American, and their sons and daughters said, wait a minute, we have something there in our past, and you're not giving it to us. So where did they go? They went to klezmer. Later they found out that that instrumental music also had texts, and they learned the text. So through a back door, they got into Yiddish.
The civil rights activist and union leader also recognized the power of music to promote peace.
There is a social purpose in what we do. You sing about history so that kids learn about history. You sing from your heart about peaceable intent, about a world that's better than the world that we have, about an America that is better than the America we have, about an Israel that's better than the Israel we have. And when you do that, you love this world more, not less.
In 2014, Bikel was invited to sing in the Austrian Parliament in Vienna on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht. In the presence of all of Austria's top dignitaries, Bikel spoke of having become a refugee and remaining one in some way for the rest of his life. I thank you for choosing to honor my people in this way, he said to them, and I would like to point out the great symbolic significance of this event, for the mass murderers are gone, and I'm still here, singing my songs of peace and freedom.
People ask me what I want written on my gravestone. And I could think of only one phrase. Der Singer von seinem Volk. I'm the singer of my people.
In my own lifetime,
We're so grateful for the presence of that movie. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as we were moved by making it. And if you have a tear to wipe off, this is a good time. So before we move on to our panel with our wonderful distinguished panelists, I want to bring out a few points for all of you. Some of you might have seen me in programs before where we highlighted a lot of Theo's more kind of entertainment side of his career. And like I said, what we're going to highlight here tonight for the rest of our program is Theo's amazing legacy of using his voice without stop for the values that he believed in. Theo grew up in a socialist home. His father was a socialist, and he revered his father until his last day. Making the world better for all Jews and for all people everywhere was his father's dictate. He taught that to young Theo when young Theo could not even speak yet. When he was a child, his father would take him to the woods of Vienna, and they would walk through the woods and sing very loudly songs in German, in Hebrew, in English, and in Yiddish, socialist songs, Zionist songs, Jewish songs, and that. So the mix between music and his ideology was together from when he was a very small child. Already when he was in England as a young man in 1946, he traveled all over England, giving free concerts. I mean, as a young man, his name was Mayer Bikel, giving concerts to benefit Jewish refugees for socialist Zionist organizations. As soon as he arrived in the States, he became deeply involved in the civil rights movement in the South for voter rights. He was involved with SNCC. He was involved with other organizations. He has 2 arrests under his belt in the South, plus 1 night in jail. He was very active in the anti-apartheid cause. That's where he has another arrest under his belt. Very vocal against McCarthyism, although when he came to the States, it was at the tail end, and he always says that he felt it to be a great insult that he wasn't picked on by the committee himself. He actually gave Pete Seeger airtime on his radio show that was called Bikel at Home at a time when Pete Seeger was not welcome on the air. And because of that reason, several radio stations that were carrying Theo's show canceled the show. He founded the Newport Folk Festival with Pete Seeger and with Peter Yarrow, who you're going to hear from later, who was actually at that first meeting at Theo's house in Greenwich Village. The Newport Folk Festival was ideological, not only because the way folk music was ideological to begin with, but the way the founders set it up was based on the principles of equality. All of the performers, whether they were very famous or no one had ever heard of them, got $50 each, and that was decided on the first meeting at Theo's house in Greenwich Village. He was the vice president of the American Jewish Congress. Among other things that he worked on in that job was convincing states to allow Jews to close on Saturday and not on Sunday in states that forced people to close one day a week, which was Sunday. He argued that this was unfair to Orthodox Jews, to Shomer Shabbat Jews, and he was successful in that. He was a labor union leader. He was the Actors Equity president or the president of the 4A's, which is the umbrella organization of all the entertainers in America, for over 30 years. Very involved in the Free Soviet Jewry movement. Some of you know his album Silent No More, which was so successful that he was able to fund the education of more than 500 young refuseniks that arrived in Israel and went to Hebrew University, funded by the proceeds of this record, Silent No More, which was refusenik movement music that Theo went in and secretly recorded in the Soviet Union. He was the president of Partners for Progressive Israel later on in his life, and therefore became number one on the progressive leftist list for the World Zionist Congress, but he unfortunately passed away right before that Congress. Some of you know his video that he made for the rights of Bedouins. He was very vocal. In his first years, very vocal Zionist when he thought that was just, that his people have a country. Later on, when he had some differences with the Israeli policies of the occupation, he was very vocal in that way. And then when he wasn't doing all of that, he sat on his chair and wrote letters to the editor that were published all the time in different newspapers around the country. So before we move on, let's hear it in Theo's own words. Let's hear an interview that he gave to the Edelson Society in 2011.
So just to pick up on that thread,
Right.
Where did your investments in civil rights and social justice, was that something that was for a long time part of your life?
I can't see how I could have possibly avoided it. Having been at the receiving end of discrimination, of persecution, having narrowly escaped being caught up in the disastrous fate that befell so many of my people, I couldn't see injustices perpetrated on other people and not do anything about it, not say anything, not yell anything, not sing anything. When I got involved in the civil rights movement in the South, North and South actually, there were Jewish people that I knew who kind of took me to task. Why are you so involved? Huh? Don't we have troubles of our own? When they hit on Jews, that's when you should be involved. I said, you don't understand. You don't understand me. He said, whenever I see an injustice, the victims in my mind become Jews. It's an easy switch. That's true and to this day. And I don't understand people who think that they have the luxury of not doing anything, of not saying halt. Not everybody on our street was a Nazi in Vienna. Obviously not. There were some decent non-Jews, but they also did not call a halt to what was happening around them. And today, even though I have to give him credit for not having participated in the barbaric acts, I can't absolve them entirely of guilt and complicity, because non-action is an act, and silence speaks.
So before I turn the floor over to Professor Mark Kligman, our co-host tonight, we're going to have a quick hello from a very dear friend, for a very close friend of ours who wishes very much that he could be here tonight. Theo had a close relationship with all of this family. Please hear from Arlo Guthrie, who could not attend but sent himself over in this way.
I should start out by saying that Theo Bikel was not a friend of mine. He was family. He was closer than friend. And it was a friendship or a family relationship that went back from when I was a little kid, long before I went to see The Russians Are Coming, which I thought was fabulous. And it was fabulous in a number of ways. But even before that, Theo had been a friend of my parents. He had been a friend of my mom, especially. And my grandmother. I mean, he was one of the few guys that sang my grandmother's songs. So we had a relationship that wasn't friendly. I mean, it was family. He was like a distant uncle to me. And when The Russians Are Coming came out, I thought, how wonderful. In the middle of the Cold War, here we were laughing. And that film went on to be laughed at around the world because it was a comedy. It was funny. It was a great human story. And it was as funny in Russia as it was here in the United States. And what a wonderful attribute to bring that kind of consciousness of humanity to a world that desperately needed it, and a world that was divided by political leadership and stuff like that. But average, everyday people were not adversaries. They were friends without knowing it. That went on to define Theo for my life. He went on from there to keep doing that over and over and over again through his songs, through his stories, through his acting, and through his person. He went as a real human being. He went not as an adversary, but as a friend, as somebody you could laugh with, as somebody you could sing with, enjoy with. What an amazing man. Somebody who was 20 years older than me. So we didn't have that immediate friendship, but we had something even deeper. I will treasure him forever for that.
Now it's my pleasure to turn this all over to Professor Mark Kligman, the Mickey Katz Chair of Jewish Music and the Director of the Lowell Milken Center for Music of the American Jewish Experience at UCLA. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for hosting us tonight.
Hi, Amy. It's a pleasure to be with you, and we are so excited that you brought this program to us. What a great opportunity for all of us. It really gives me special pleasure in this next section to introduce three very special guests, people that work with and knew Theo very closely and very well. David Myers, Peter Yarrow, and Hazan Mike Stein. We're going to give them each an opportunity to share their experiences. I'll introduce each of them individually, and then they'll share with you their words and their comments. So first, David Myers, who holds the Sandy and Ludwig Kahn Chair in Jewish History at UCLA. He serves as the director of the Luskin Center for History and Policy. He has written extensively in the fields of modern Jewish intellectual and cultural history, and he's also the president of the New Israel Fund, an organization that advances and supports liberal democracy in Israel. David, we welcome you to come into the conversation now and share with us how you put your views of Theo into the context of Jewish history and Jewish engagement with social justice. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, Amy, for inviting me. It's just such an incredible honor and pleasure to be here with you. to recall our beloved dear friend Theo. And I suppose I should say at the outset what I was going to say at the end, but in the wake of Arlo Guthrie's remarks, I just have to sort of begin with the idea, the basic and important Hebrew expression, Kishmo Kenhu. As is his name, so is Theo. Theo was a gift from God. And as I went back and thought about all that he did over the course of his extraordinary career, I really had this sense of someone touched by divine grace. I should begin by saying that Theo was just an amazing study in contrasts. He was so authentic, yet so capable of adopting the accents, the personae, the identities of anyone else, of every other imaginable culture. He was capable of blending in effortlessly, and yet himself capable of leading. He was at home wherever he was, and yet, by his own account, eternally homeless, peripatetic. He often described himself as a mix between the wandering Jew and the Flying Dutchman because he was on an airplane so often. He was a particularist, deeply rooted in Jewish culture, and a universalist whose heart and compassion for humanity writ large really was boundless. And Theo sort of came to that mixture of sensibilities through his really extraordinary life. So he's born in Vienna in 1924. He leaves in 1938, just after the Anschluss, after the Nazi occupation of Austria, makes his way to Palestine, is there for 8 years until 1946, when he then takes up his career as an actor or as an acting student at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in 1946 in London, and then arrives in the United States in 1954. And he arrives in the United States at a very interesting point in the history of the Jewish community. It was a point of real transition between the culture of the founding, of the immigrant generation that came from Eastern Europe largely, as well as the Middle East in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. A generation that was rooted in the languages and cultures of the homeland, and the generation of the children of those immigrants who were anxious to integrate and assimilate into the American cultural mainstream. They were, in fact, very much committed to the ideal of the melting pot, a term that came from the Anglo-Jewish poet Israel Zangwill. Theo, for his part, was not all that enamored of the melting pot model. He understood it. He favored an alternative to that, which was the idea of cultural pluralism, a concept that came from the social theorist Horace Kalin, whom he tells us in his wonderful autobiography that I recommend to everybody. He met. There it is. I think it's on page 384. You can look up Horace Kalin, who gave us this notion of cultural pluralism, the idea that there is a rich mosaic of cultures, and that one should know and, in fact, own one's own culture while at the same time appreciating the rich diversity of others. That was Theo, and that was the way in which he was both a particularist and a universalist. And there's a really wonderful anecdote from his activism in the civil rights movement in the early 60s that I think reflects that. So as Amy mentioned, Theo was arrested for his activism in Alabama in the early 60s. And he was to spend a night in jail, and he insisted on being served kosher food. Now, Theo, neither at that time nor at any other time, held to the Jewish dietary regulations, but he insisted in entering into that work of social justice through the portal of his Jewishness. And in every decade in the United States, Theo really married his Jewish sensibilities and his universalist instincts. He married his art to his politics. In the 50s, he indeed advocated and agitated for the right to free expression for his fellow artists who were subjected to the Red Scare. In the 1960s, he committed himself and his art to the cause of civil rights. In the 1970s, he did the same for Soviet Jewry. In the 1980s, he advocated passionately on behalf of the cause of culture in the United States. In the 90s, he begins to take up the cause of peace in Israel-Palestine. And at every point in his journey, he commits himself fully bringing together art, culture, and politics to advance the human condition, but always doing so through a Jewish lens. That Jewish lens crafted by his unique experience, born of both persecution and an enormous appreciation for the vitality of Jewish culture.
Thank you so much, David. We'll invite people to add questions and comments later on in the program, and we can further explore some of these ideas. But thank you for putting things together in such a beautiful way. Before we move on to the next member of our panel, we have another short clip of Theo singing the Hammer Song.
This is one of the Yiddish songs that I learned from my proudly socialist father. I sang it back in 1963 at a black church in Birmingham, Alabama. I sang it in its original Yiddish and then again in my own English translation. I didn't know whether the unfamiliar words or the tune would evoke anything at all in this audience, but I sang it. Und du ackerst und du säst und du fieterst und du mähst und du hammerst und du spinnst, sag mein Volk, was du verdienst. Kling, klang, klingt der Hammer mit sein Gesang. Kling, klang, zerreißt die Ketten von Sklavenzwang. Who prepares your evening meal, and who cares what grief you feel? When you die, will someone mourn? To what purpose, tell me, were you born? Kling, klong, listen to the hammer song. Kling, klong, we'll break the yoke, boys, it won't be long. Mann von Arbeit aufgewacht und erkennt dein starke Macht. Wenn dein starke Hand noch will, stehen alle Räder still. Now awake, the end's in sight. See your power, feel your might. Were it not for your strong hand, not a wheel could turn in all the land. Kling, klong, listen to the hammer song. Kling, klong, we'll break the yoke, boys, it won't be long. Kling, klang, klingt der Hammer mit sein Gesang. Kling, klang, zerreißt die Ketten von Sklavenzwang.
So this sets the stage so well for our next guest on the panel, Peter Yarrow, singer-songwriter who is part of Peter, Paul, and Mary and wrote or co-wrote many of the songs that we all sing. He's also a political activist and has supported liberal causes, including Operation Respect, an organization that promises tolerance and civility in schools. And Peter, with the stage now set for folk music and activism, please bring us into the world of folk music and your engagement. And I see you have your guitar, so feel free to pick up your guitar. Oh, I think you need to unmute. We need you to unmute.
Yes, I've been attempting to do so. It's so wonderful to hear Theo singing this. You know, it brings him back to me so powerfully, because Theo was really a role model for me. I had two role models, Pete Seeger and Theo Bikel. Pete would present music in such a powerful way, with a sense that he was letting the history flow through him. Theo was the activist, saying, I am this person now. I am experiencing this. My heart is breaking, or I am rejoicing. And he moved me so much. I actually met him when I was in high school at the at the home of Mimi Sigal, who went to the High School of Music and Art and was my sweetheart at the time, and Tony, her brother. And I heard him, and I thought I'd never heard anybody that just occupied the space with such heart before. And then, when I was a senior at Cornell, I was the president of the folk club, and I brought him to sing to Cornell, and that's where our real closeness crystallized. Then, now, when the Newport Folk Festival began, there were those who really wanted that the beautiful culture of humanity that what sprang not from dollars but sprang from their true experience to be exposed, and it was like, as Theo was saying, it was like a history lesson to see these people, whether it's the Georgia Sea Island Singers, or Mississippi John Hurt, or the Clog Dancers, or whatever. But the moment that this turned was really in 1963, when Theo, Peter, Paul and Mary, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, the Freedom Singers, and Theo were on the stage with their hands crossed singing, "We Shall Overcome." And there was a sense, the same sense that I had at the March on Washington, or, multiple marches on Washington, that we were living the consciousness of that dream together. And when Theo, if you look at him in the picture of it, he is in an ecstasy of, I love you, and I love you through this pain, of recognition of the mutuality of our pain. And this was what so moved me about him, was that his whole life was a gesture of saying, I am in your heart. I am not representing it. I am embracing it. And when I fell in love with Mary Beth McCarthy, Gene McCarthy's niece, I was campaigning for him, and I made a date with Theo. And he described it to me later, because I didn't see it in this way, but he said, you really were asking permission from me. He was like my older brother. And there were, through the movements, where people, we were not black, but in 1964, for instance, he was in Freedom Summer down there. Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner were killed. We really saw these people, as he said, I saw them as Jews. I see myself as black, or I see myself as gay. I didn't have that background, but I'm getting it more so now. And as the years passed, particularly with the anti-war movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the heartbreak in America that was going on. And I think now, if Theo were here, if only there's few people, I think, if only Theo were here, if only I could embrace him, if only I could cry with him, if only I could rejoice with him, my heart would be filled and restored to a sense of greater wholeness, and I said, what would he say? I say this about Mary Travers too, but Theo, he was so wise from his heart, not from, he was learned as all get out. He was smarter than all of us, certainly more learned, but what shone through was that he was putting his life on the line in the most powerful way every time he sang, and every time he spoke about what he cared about. This was not, he wasn't up there performing. And then we'd laugh. He told great jokes. He loved to tell jokes, and he'd laugh at this thing. Remember telling jokes? It was so wonderful. But the most important thing was that he never, never, never stood back from the bravery that was needed to live that authentic sense of concern. That's what you got from Theo, that he was truly, he wasn't playing the part of anybody. I'm sure when he was playing what was in the crazy when he's playing the sheriff, he was inhabiting the soul of it, but it was a humane sheriff. He was a blessed. Theo is. We will not know many others of this. He is with us. He's with us. And Amy, I adore you. And Theo and you were were you a couple? Oh my God. What? You were ridiculous in love. And he was a little bit older than you, but you were also a little bit older than he was. He had a very youthful spirit. So I loved Theo. I loved him very much, and I miss him terribly.
Thank you, Peter. That's really, really special and inspiring, and just really appreciate hearing all that. We're going to transition to another piece of music. This is a really charming video. We'll be able to hear Theo sing with Pete Seeger, a familiar tune that many of us know of Hine Matov.
There we are. Hine Matov u'manayim she'erachim gam yachad. Hine Matov u'manayim she'erachim gam yachad. Hine Matov she'erachim gam yachad. Hine mayim she'erachim gam yachad. Hine matov mayim she'erachim gam yachad. Hine mayim she'erachim gam yachad. Hine matov she'erachim gam yachad. Hine matov she'erachim gam yachad. How pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together. No, it's not Arabic.
I just have to thank you, Amy, for finding these gems of videos, of songs that really...
Actually, that video continues. They do another version of Hine Matov. So if anyone wants to find it on YouTube, all you just have to Google is Theo Bikel and Pete Seeger and Hine Matov, and you'll find it. It goes on for another 5 or 10 minutes.
Thank you. So our last, but certainly not least, guest on our moderated panel here is Hazan Mike Weiss, cantor since 2000 at Temple Aliyah in Los Angeles. He is a successful Grammy award-winning singer, songwriter, and actor. He's also a voice for social causes and peace. And Mike, it's so wonderful to have you. And we want you to just take this opportunity to talk about, Theo's impact, in your life and the work that you do in Jewish music and peace and justice.
First, I'm so honored to be on this panel. Wow. But I want to sing something that I had the honor of singing with him. Just a little taste, a bisili. Sheyabane beis hamikdash bimheira v'yameinu v'sein chelkeinu b'soyroisecho yo-bo-bo-bo-bo-bo. That is Theo's voice. Bo-bo-bo-bo-bo-bo. Theo was like a father to me. In fact, Mimi, thank you. This is one of his kippot that he wore. And He had such an effect on Jewish music. He was Jewish music. He was the sound that I always heard in my head. And that voice was always there. When I think of Jewish music, I'm thinking of his effect on social justice. I go back to Pesach and I hear him singing Zognit Kenmo, right? The partisan song. That song of struggle, that song of defiance, that was his voice. And he told me, he said, Mike, when I sing, I'm telling a story. And he got a little crap from some of the folk singers just saying, well, you're being an actor, not a folk singer. But that's not true. You have to do that. You have to sing and tell the story. And it's been such an influence on people like myself who are cantors, who I will tell you that there's not one cantor that can say that they did not listen to his voice and get something from it, get material at least. He recorded so many songs, the songs of the Chalutzim, the pioneers, right? He had a tremendous impact and an impact on my family. And my sons are all Jewish musicians. I wanted them to be doctors. But anyway, he kind of adopted them. And he said he was an honorary Rolling Stein, because that's the name of my family's group, the Rolling Steins, in case you didn't know. Anyway, so he came to our synagogue. He was such a good friend, such a good friend. And as Arlo said, he was family. He came to our synagogue often. He honored me when I was honored by our synagogue, and he presented me with an award. And every year he would come for our Martin Luther King weekend program. And he would stand up there with us with his cane in his hand, which you saw in that little film from the Milliken Foundation, with that cane in his hand. And he would sing, "We shall overcome." And he'd hold that cane way up high, right, for everybody. And everybody raised their hands with him. He was amazing. What can I say? He was, I love how he told great stories, and we shared so much. So I love what he said, that you cannot be a Jew without concern for social justice. And that has influenced me so much in my work. He also said to me, Michael, don't leave your house without your guitar, because you'll go to a party and someone will say, Michael, where's your guitar? So I bring my guitar anywhere, but the guitar is a symbol, because for him, the guitar spoke. And if you didn't speak, why were you there? You needed to speak out. You needed to sing the songs that made a difference. You needed to tell the story. And he has influenced me so much. I work with young people, with neurodiverse, differently abled people. And Peter, thank you so much for being in one of the videos that we presented. He brought together a whole group of people, a whole generation of people that were so concerned about social justice. And it's his voice that rings in our head. It rings in my head, the Jewish aspect and the social justice aspect. And one thing I want to say is we're coming to Pesach, and he said, remember, we were slaves in Israel. And we should remember that we want to be treated better, right? And I love Israel even more when I criticize Israel. I love my country even more when I criticize my country. It means I care. And he always cared. And he would hold my hand, my face like this in his hands, and I was in heaven. And I still am with his memory. I helped produce an album called While I'm Here. And I sat in the living room, right where Amy is right there right now. Yeah. And I spoke to him for hours and hours. And we have so much information, and we made it into a spoken word album and also an album with music on it.
And Peter's in the liner notes.
Peter's in the liner notes.
So it all goes around.
It all goes around. So I know I was going to talk about cantors, but I think that all of us owe a debt of gratitude, and he has shaped the entire generation, he is the voice of our people. And I say is because he's still there. Even on his gravestone, his nigun, the notes of his nigun, the family nigun is there on his gravestone, and the guitar. Singer.
And I am the singer of my people.
I am the singer of my people.
Thank you so
Mark,
much.
may I add something too? I want to add something.
Please.
Mike, thank you so much. All of you, thank you so much. I'm not stealing the spotlight. I just want to add something that what all of the members of our panelists just said, I hear in different versions every day in the 5.5 years since Theo has left us. Every day I get emails, I get messages, I get letters of thousands and thousands of people that I don't know who they are, that just want to reach out and tell me how much Theo touched them, whether they knew him very well or whether they only met him for a moment. They write me and they say, in 1971, I was on a train and there he was and he said hello. You know, it was a highlight of my life. Or because of him, I got involved in something or other. Or because he said hello to my mother, I started whatever. And I've thought about it a lot. I thought, what is that quality that he had that touched people so much to their core? So in a very simplistic way, I think of it as love, that he really was. I think somebody said that he was a gift from God. There was something about him that was so infused with love that when he met people, they felt it and it touched them and it healed them. So he embodied something that I know that I strive for it. I don't imagine I'll reach it in this lifetime, of how while reaching for causes that are grand, with money, with marching, with fighting in Congress, with doing all the things that we can do, we also in our own lives, every person we meet in an elevator or when we get onto a subway, which we're not doing much of these days, but we will be doing again soon, I suppose, that we touch the people that we meet with as much love in the interaction itself as we do when we're out there in the world, you know, being activists. And I know that from Theo, I learned that very, very much. And I think that we heard that now from everybody in some way. I just wanted to interject that.
And he also said, this guitar, this is my weapon.
My guitar is my weapon. That's right. My songs are my voice and my guitar is my weapon. I think Pete Seeger used to say that also.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So to move things along, we have another video greeting that really helps us see how the next generation is influenced by Theo Bikel. And Amy, why don't you set it up for us?
There's a wonderful, incredible young musician who I hope he's on right now, but I'm not sure if he is or not. Many of you know him, Daniel Kahn. Some of you heard his amazing version of Hallelujah in Yiddish a couple of years ago, and possibly last week heard his with his collaborators, heard This Land Is Your Land in Yiddish. Daniel Kahn is an incredible musician. He's an American who lives in Berlin. He's a Yiddish musician, and we chose him. When Theo died, we set up together with the Ashkenaz Foundation in Canada something called the Theodore Bikel Scholar in Residence Scholarship. And Daniel Kahn was our first one, and it was a very obvious choice because Theo, who was very proud of his own renditions of Yiddish songs and also of his own translations. Theo was a great translator. I don't know who of you know that, but he stayed up at night when he couldn't sleep. He'd take his hand at translating, and he was a great translator. But he said Daniel Kahn's translations, he was willing to say, were as good as his own. And I'd never heard him say that about anybody. And he loved the way Daniel embodied this social justice fighter, and how Daniel takes the Yiddish back to that feeling of not something nebuchi, not something nebushi, but actually very sexy, very fiery, very strong, fighting for social justice, that is actually the legacy of our Yiddish. And that's what Daniel has in his music. So we asked him to send, just like Arlo, a video greeting. And I hope I set that up well. So we'll hear from him now. He's in Berlin, and like everyone else, he wishes he could be here.
Shalom Aleichem. My name is Daniel Kahn, and it's an honor for me to talk to you about one of my biggest heroes, role models, mentors, friends, a dear neshama, Theodore Bikel. I got the Theo Bikel folk singer strings here. I had the honor of meeting Theo in 2006, I think, in Krakow, and I got to know him in many different places, in Vienna, his hometown, in Canada, in New York, in California. And he was such a force of nature. He was a polyglot, polymath, performing, a juggernaut. The way he so easily passed over borders. He was a true cultural diplomat, an ambassador who carried whole worlds and whole languages, whole cultures with him, and he brought Yiddish to its rightful place amongst other folk cultures and used that Yerusha, that inheritance, to address the world, to address issues of social justice and humanity, and he always did it with such intelligence and humor. He was a role model in his ability to switch between disciplines as a theater artist, as a performer, as an actor, and as a singer and a songwriter. And it was his ability as a translator that touches me most deeply. He was able to get to the soul of a song and to express it and express himself through his translations into English. And it was always a big role model for me when I was translating songs. He once told me, "I'll stay up all night for a rhyme," and I believe that. The very last time I saw him, we were performing in his honor at the YIVO in New York, just a few weeks before he died, and he shared with me his translation into English of Adrian Cooper's great song for peace, Wollt ich gehabt, koich, and it went like this. I remember it so clearly when he told it to me. So it's wollt ich gehad koich, wollt ich gelaufen in die Gassen, wollt ich geschrien Sholem, 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 Sholem. And he wrote, "If I had strength and vigor, I'd find the words and call them in a voice grown big and bigger. I'd call out Sholem, Sholem." It's so Theo, and it's so straight from the heart, and I wish his legacy many more years. His song goes on, his struggle goes on, and so bleibt gesund und stark, with strength and vigor, just like Theo.
Thank you, Daniel. So I'm going to thank our fabulous panel. Am I unmuted? Yes. I'm going to thank our fabulous panel, and I'm going to tell you all that if you'd like to hear more from these wonderful gentlemen, we're going to have a Q&A in just a while, and don't hesitate to leave your questions, not only for me, but for everybody. Everybody on this screen knew Theo intimately and would have answers for you, whether they're intellectual or whether they're whatever they are. And in a moment, an official announcement is going to come out about putting questions in the chat. I wasn't supposed to say it myself, so pretend you didn't hear it from me. So we are at the top of the hour. Traditional wisdom is that people don't stay around for Zoominars more than an hour, but I tried to convince the organizers that in this case, people will stay around. So please try to prove me right. But if you need to leave, you're very welcome to leave. There's still many of us here to play. We have a little bit more to go, not so much. We're coming close to the final story of this evening. And after the final story, we'll have a Q&A, and maybe Mike and Peter might even be willing to sing something live for us. They're still here. But before we get to the Q&A and maybe some encores, and before we get to the final story, I want to tell you that, as I'm sure you realize, we barely even touched the surface. Talking about Theo is not so much about making a big hoo-ha about someone, although it's worthwhile to make a hoo-ha about him. It's because what his life teaches us, it's for drawing inspiration from his life. And it's the historical context, the cultural context that teaches us and gives us our own courage. So we really scratched the surface. If you'd like to learn more about Theo, and I believe that you do, and especially if you're young people that never even heard about Theo, I'm so excited to know so many students are on here tonight, students who I bet you never knew we had such a Jewish hero, such a hero in our cultural world. There's so much more to learn about him. You can start by going to theodorebikel.org. That's Theo's website. Or you can go to my website, amyginsbergbikel.com, and there's a link on my website over to Theo's website. And you can learn everything about his legacy. So it's theodorebikel.org, he's the org, and it's amyginsbergbikel.com, I'm the com. And not to be a macher, but I have something called the Theodore Bikel Legacy Project, where we teach so much about Theo's legacy, and we always need a little bit of funds to keep going. And a way to help us is to go to my store, and some of the proceeds of anything you will purchase will go to help me keep Theo's legacy alive. Here's our book, The City of Light, that tells the story of Theo's childhood in Vienna, something I'm going to talk about again in a moment. And then we have Theo's autobiography, which is terrific. And we have a CD produced with Mike Stein that's spoken word and a collection of his songs throughout his career. And we even have the DVD of the amazing film Theodore Bikel in the Shoes of Shalom Aleichem. And only for you, my dear audience, I made a parcel or a package that you can go on my website and you can find a special UCLA package of all these products. Okay, now we're done selling. And like I said, I hope that you stay on with us until the end, which is coming up very soon. And now I want to tell you a story which is going to be the peak of our evening. And Theo considered it the peak of his career. And that is something that was alluded to in the short film that you saw earlier. And that is the concert that Theo gave in the Parliament in Vienna for the 75-year anniversary of Kristallnacht, which is in 2014. Theo first won an award from the Austrian government, their highest award that they give for arts and culture. And at that occasion, when he came to collect his award, he met the president of the parliament, an amazing woman named Barbara Prammer, Zichrona Livracha, who's meanwhile passed away. And she had the amazing idea that Theo could come, this is Barbara here in the photo at the podium, that Theo could come to the parliament and give a concert in the actual Parliament Hall. As you see here, this is the Austrian Parliament where, the Austrian law is decided, where all of the dignitaries sit. And so off we went together with Mirma Klusho, Theo's friend and accompanist with the accordion, and sat there in the hall with many of the ministers, the chancellor, the vice chancellor, the chancellor wasn't there, but the vice chancellor, the president of the parliament, and Minister of Defense, Minister of Education, and many generals, including the Chief of Staff of the Army in Austrian uniform, and also the chief of the military chief of the Vienna division, so he was also in his uniform. And they all sat there at their tables, and Theo stood before them, put his talit, draped his talit over the chair, over the podium of the speaker. And he said to them all in German, which you understand is his mother tongue, German with the Yiddish that his father spoke to him. And he said, I want to thank you so much for inviting me to give a concert at this momentous occasion of 75 years of Kristallnacht. The significance of this event is not lost on me, that the mass murderers are gone, and I'm the one here singing mine and my people's songs of peace and of freedom. And he went on to sing his first song, which was the Yiddish song Kinderjahren, childhood years. And he said, I was born in Vienna. I loved Vienna. From Vienna, I learned appreciation of theater, of music, of art. I saw myself as growing up in this city, becoming an adult in the city, and I would have loved to do that. But At the age of 14, I had to leave and became a refugee and remained so in some way or another for the rest of my life. But when I think about my childhood years, it's Vienna that I think of. And he sang the song Kinderjorn and went on to give a beautiful concert on the occasion of 75 years of Kristallnacht. While the people in the hall, I was sitting from behind, and I watched them in the beginning kind of tense, because who could imagine what this kind of a concert might be from this Jewish Austrian icon? And I feel quite sure that they felt that they were in for a scolding or a shaming, but that's not at all what was in Theo's mind. From what you heard of him tonight, you realize that Theo came into every situation with the thought of how can I bring love and peace and forward movement into every situation that I go into. So he did not spare words, but he sang to them Hebrew songs, he sang Yiddish songs, he sang some chansons in French, he sang some German songs, and everybody started to relax and tap their fingers on the table. And it almost started to feel like it was a regular concert, instead of actually what it was this Jewish survivor singing on the 75-year anniversary of Kristallnacht. And when Theo came to the end, he said, now this is a song that's only listened to standing, and it's only sung standing. So everybody please stand up. And everybody stood up, and there was a solemnness in the room, but also a feeling of holiness in the room, that everybody was a part of something momentous, of a kind of a guilty or a kind of a love that no one knew if it was allowed to be, if we were allowed to be having these feelings of the magnificence of the love that was flowing in the room. And Theo had everyone stand, and then he stood up. And then he sang a song that many of you in LA have heard Theo sing at the Museum of the Holocaust on Kristallnacht. He sang Zog Lied Kein Mol in Yiddish, the survivor song. So the song that in Yiddish that survivors sang during days of resistance, Theo sang in the parliament. And I sat there thinking, if the partisans would have been able to know that 75 years later, this is what was happening, and not chas v'chalila, some other kind of scenario. And the goosebumps were coming up and down my arms. And when he was done singing the partisan song to all of the Austrian dignitaries standing at attention, many of them in military uniform, he had them sit down, and then he pulled out his talit, his Jewish prayer shawl, from the podium behind him. And he said, I'm a Kohen, I'm a priest from a long line of Jewish priests. And really all that means now is that we bless each other in synagogue, or maybe we bless our children at the Sabbath table. But because of the extraordinary momentousness of this occasion, I've taken permission from the chief rabbi of Austria, and I'm going to bless all of you, the Jewish priestly blessing. And he got on under his prayer shawl. Some of you know that there's an older way of doing the Kohen blessing under the shawl. Theo was an actor in a ham. And the chief rabbi stood up, and they read the lines to each other. And Theo blessed the entire parliament and said to them, I'm blessing you so that you should take it to your constituents, and you should make this country of Austria a country full of light into the nations. What you've experienced, the horrors and the unmentionable things that went on here, should never go on, not only in this country, but ever again in the world. And you should make it your life mission to make sure you make your country, an example to all. And that night back in the hotel room, after all, Theo was 88 or 89, 88. He was tired. It was a long day. It was a lot of traveling, and he went to bed. And laying in bed, looking out the window at Vienna, at the city of his childhood, he said, Moses said, everybody was born for a purpose. And I'll say in Hebrew, Ulai l'shem kach ani notzarti, maybe for this day I was created. And as many of you have heard me say before, and as my book, The City of Light, the last words in my book, The City of Light, at that moment I took a holy vow before God that for the rest of my life, as many times as I could, to as many people as I could, I would tell this story so that we would remember it and that we would understand and grasp the significance of it. So with that, I'm gonna go to Theo for his last song. It's from Jacques Brel, Alive and Well in Paris, a show that Theo was in many years ago, a beautiful musical. We'll hear it, and then we'll be back for questions and answers. And thank all of you so very much for being here.
אם נדע לאהוב, אז הבוקר יאור, ונשיר שיר חדש, אביבי ושיכור. אם נדע לאהוב, אז תחדול האיבה, כל דרכינו שלום, לילותינו שלווה. If we only have love, with our arms open wide, then the young and the old will stand at our side. If we only have love, love that's falling like rain, then the parched desert earth will grow green again. If we only have love for the hymn that we shout, for the song that we sing, then we'll have a way out. If we only have love, we can reach those in pain. We can heal all our wounds. We can use our own names. If we only have love, we can melt all the guns and then give the new world to our daughters and sons. If we only have love, then Jerusalem stands, and then death has no shadow. There are no foreign lands. If we only have love, we will never bow down. We'll be tall as the pines, neither heroes nor clowns. If we only have love, then we'll only be men, and we'll drink from the grail to be born once again. Then with nothing at all but the little we are, we'll have conquered all time, all space, the sun and the stars.
Thank you, everyone. Perla Carney is going to come back on now and moderate the Q&A. And we have an encore from Theo and Five-ish Finkel after the Q&A, and we'll see if Peter and Mike might give us a little tune. So if you have to leave, goodbye, and otherwise stay with us. And Perla, I'm inviting you back on.
Actually, it's Mark.
So Amy, I get the pleasure.
Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry. That's right. I forgot.
As moderator, we'll bring back
And we're bringing everybody, all of our panel back on the screen as well, in case there's
big
questions.
thanks to you, Amy, for just organizing a wonderful, beautiful, beautiful program. The comments that people are making, we invite you to add your comments into the chat if you're watching on Zoom, or if you're on YouTube. We're also looking at those chats as well. So we have a lot of people, and we'd love to hear what you want to say. And many people are just thanking you, Amy, and just mentioning their connection to Theo, past memories and experiences with you and with Peter and with Mike Stein. And people are very, very grateful. There's a question here that I think is important for us to ponder on. And I think it's something that everyone on the panel can comment on, which is as follows. Did Theo anticipate the escalation of contemporary anti-Semitism? Did he see the coming seemingly abandonment of Jewish contributions to advancing Black civil rights? I think it's such an important and powerful question for us to think about. I know that Theo's work goes on with everything that all of you are doing, and maybe if you each have a moment or a thought to share to that question, do you think Theo saw this? And, what about the Jewish contributions now to civil rights and social justice? So Amy, do you want to start, or do we want to, what would you like to say?
Amy, you're muted. Amy, you are muted.
I would like to let Peter take a stab at that one because I saw his hand up in the air.
So Peter, we need you to unmute.
I'm trying to, okay, but it's up to the hand of dog that does it. I think that Theo knew that in every generation this struggle would exist, and that life is about that, the finding of the dignity as the cruelty is at war with the love and the humanity. And I don't think he'd be surprised, because he knew that if we relaxed our watchfulness, our vigilance, that it would rise, not just anti-Semitism, but to him, racism was anti-Semitism. To him, the hatred that we are seeing now would break his heart, but he would be fighting. And what he would be fighting to transcend this with the kind of compassion and love that could let us reach out and walk in each other's shoes and find ways to heal the horrible divides that are created by those, as did Hitler, that made people do despicable things. So he would not be surprised, but he would be at the forefront. I wish he were.
So Mike, and then of course David, to comment on the same.
Okay, Amy and I talked a lot about what would he have felt in the last 4 years of the most, the door opening for so many to be so hateful, that he would be just so very appalled and so very active in trying, no matter how he felt, no matter how tired he was, he would stand up somewhere and speak out. And I just wanted to say that.
We definitely tried with the Theodore Bikel Legacy Project to raise our voice as it stood for Theo's voice, and we had several different civic actions, and I wrote my op-eds and went everywhere and spoke. Together with Mike, we produced an event called Together We Stand at a cemetery, a Jewish cemetery in Los Angeles, after there was a lot of vandalism at holy spaces around the United States, to proclaim that Los Angeles is a county of love and of mutual respect and understanding. But as the years went by, there became so much to comment about and so much to do. It was hard to keep up with any of it. We just did whatever we could.
So David, I think you would want to say something.
Yeah, I just want to remind us that Theo's political consciousness was really forged in 1938. It was forged in the wake of the Anschluss. It was forged in the months immediately preceding and after Kristallnacht. It was also forged by the Zionist commitment of his family, which instilled in him a sense of activism. In other words, don't sit by passively and let your historical fate be determined by others, but take grasp of it yourself. And I think that Theo would observe what has unfolded over the last 4 years or so with the same fierceness, the same urgency that he brought to every single one of his commitments. And he would bring that urgency and fierceness without ever submitting or surrendering to despair. That was a hallmark of Theo. He was a believer in the possibility of transformation and change. One might have sort of generated or arrived at a different conclusion if one had one's consciousness forged by what he observed as a 14-year-old. But it was exactly the opposite. He developed a belief in the possibility of change, and in some sense, in the goodness of the human condition.
That's exactly.
So he would be standing alongside those struggling against anti-Semitism and those struggling against racial injustice in this country. And he would take heart in the fact that he had heirs to his legacy, young people committed to a Jewish voice for social justice, to fighting anti-Semitism and xenophobia and racism. And I should say he would be so proud of people like Daniel Kahn, who are the inheritors of this extraordinary musical tradition. And he would be proud of the fact that Daniel was singing about Sholem, about peace. So was his own commitment.
I also,
David, I'm sorry, I'm just going to say one thing. And David's so proud of you for becoming the president of the New Israel Fund, an organization that he loved. So proud of you, proud of the young organizations, Bend the Arc, if not now, immigrant rights work, and all of the work that we all know to be liberal America, trans rights, Black Lives Matter. These are things that were all deeply embedded in his heart.
I also want to add one thought. He would not succumb to returning this hatred with hate. He would be today shedding light, and he would say that we can hate the act, but he would not hate the person, because he would know that's so corrosive. And that's a kind of an elevated spirituality that he was capable of that few are. But that he would lead with this love, this fierce light that he would embody, and that he would not only succumb, he would not succumb to the hatred. He would not be warped in his love.
Mark, I may be the only person standing between this audience and a Peter Yarrow song, but I feel I have to just add one small point about why Theo was such an inspiring mentor to me and so many others. It has to do with Sholem. The great German Jewish intellectual Gershom Scholem had a fierce debate with another great German Jewish intellectual, Hannah Arendt, over Scholem's perception that Arendt lacked Ahavas Yisrael, love of Israel, love of the Jewish people. And out of that came this curious formulation uttered by Scholem and then by Arendt in response, when she said, you're right, Scholem, I don't have Ahavas Yisrael. I don't love a people, I love people. And I think the essence of Theo for me was that he truly loved his people, and he truly loved people.
I'd like to recall a moment when Amy and I and David Broza were down at the winery in New York, and Theo was as fiery as ever, but in his wheelchair. And there was a night that David Broza and I were singing, and I wanted to include Theo, but we couldn't get on the stage to go to the mic. So what we did was we came to the floor, no sound system, and everybody, instead of sitting in chairs, came crowded around, and we sang this song. And I'm going to sing the first line, and then Michael Stein will sing the second one, and you'll see what I mean. And then Theo sang, and there's a tape of it. It just happened to be that it was taped. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing, Michael.
Where have all the flowers gone? Long time ago.
Where have all the flowers gone?
Gone to graveyards.
No. Young girls that pick their
everyone.
And you know what, Michael? We also sang this song together at your synagogue.
That's right. We did.
That's right. I remember this. And
But I got the words right. Yeah.
so we have this what okay, now we're going to do now. Where have all the graveyards gone? Long time passing.
Where have all the graveyards gone? Long time ago.
And where have all the graveyards gone? They've gone to flowers, everyone. When
will they ever learn?
When will they ever learn?
When will they ever
Oh, thank you so much. That was so beautiful. Well, we do have an encore from Theo and Five-ish Finkel of blessed memory, both of them. And that's supposed to be the end. So I don't really want to do it because I don't want to say goodbye to everybody and I want to stay on for the rest of the night. But I do know that that's not realistic and that people want to go. So what we'll do is we'll hear the encore from Theo and Five-ish. That'll be the official end of the program. Everyone's allowed to leave, no guilt trips at all.
Not until we applaud
But
Amy.
if anybody wants to stay,
Amy.
thank
Amy,
you, everybody.
You are keeping this light alive with such dignity and grace.
Can I just
Well, maybe after the video, if there's a few people left, maybe Peter, you'll sing This Little Light of Mine.
Amy, I'd like to just say goodbye to everybody and hope that they enjoyed the program. We'd like to thank our distinguished guests who so generously gave of their time and their talent and contributed enormously to the success of tonight's program. Above all, thank you, Amy, for sharing with us this fascinating, loving profile of Theo, our great national Jewish treasure. His rich legacy will live on for generations to come because you're keeping his legacy alive. May his memory be a blessing. Good night.
Amen.
And thank you.
Stay for the encore though.
My good and dear and old friend, Five-ish Finkel, and we'll do something together.
I'd be delighted.
We've done for years.
Let me go to the side. I always remember when we did Fiddler together, I was your butcher. And
That's
you were
right.
my Tevye.
That's right.
It was the best years of my career.
How come?
Really wonderful.
How come they give you all these sexy lines in Boston public?
Oh, really? You know what I mean?
Innuendos.
Oh, all these innuendos, and thank you, David Kelly.
All right.
Oh, are we ready?
We are ready.
I'm the butcher, you're Tevye, and I want to marry your daughter. How's that?
Have we set it up for you?
Okay. To life,
L'chaim, 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 to life. Here's to the father I tried to be.
Here's to my bride to be.
Great L'chaim, to life, L'chaim, 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 to life. Life has a way of confusing us,
Blessing and bruising us.
Great L'chaim, to life. God would like us to be joyful, even when our hearts lie panting on the floor.
How much more can we be joyful when there's really something to be joyful for?
To life, L'chaim, to Tzeichel, my daughter.
My wife! It gives you something to think about.
Something to drink about.
Great L'chaim to life! Hey, ha!
To life, L'chaim, 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 to life. Here's to the father I tried to be.
Here's to my bride to be.
Great L'chaim, to life, L'chaim, 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 to life.
Life has a way of confusing us,
blessing and bruising us.
Make that higher
The life! Hey!
Be joyful even when I can't think to be joyful for.
Hey!
Your life, the higher.
Hey, yeah!
Disciple, my daughter,
My wife! Life has a way of confusing us.
blessing and losing us.
Make life higher to life! Let's higher, everybody!
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Whoa, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it on. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Michael, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let
it shine. Yeah, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
And with Theo in our hearts, we're gonna let it shine, shine. Oh, with Theo's love and the light in our hearts, we're gonna let it shine. With David Myers and his beautiful bride, we're gonna let it shine. With Amy Bikel, with Paula, and with Mark and Michael now. This little light of mine, let's do it even if it's out of sync. I'm gonna let it shine. This little light, you can sing, everybody. I'm
gonna let it shine. This little light of mine.
gonna let it on.
Gonna let it shine.
Let it shine.
Let it shine.
Let it shine. Yeah.
Okay, everybody, that was a hard ending. Thank you so much. We love you, and we hope we see you
love
again
you.
out and about in the world. Stay